So you finally said it. And the moment those words left your mouth, everything shifted in ways you might not have even realized yet. Because what you did wasn't just speaking your mind, or venting frustration, or having a moment of courage. It was something far more profound than that. Something that reverberates through the very fabric of how we communicate and lie to each other, and dance around uncomfortable realities, day after day after day, until we forget what honesty even sounds like. You broke through all of that in a single breath. For months, maybe years, that truth has been building inside you like pressure in a sealed container, growing heavier and sharper with every fake smile you returned, every diplomatic silence you maintained, every time you swallowed what you really wanted to say because you were trying to keep the peace or avoid conflict or protect someone else's comfort at the expense of your own sanity. And all of that accumulated weight finally found its release in words so raw and unfiltered that they didn't just fill the space between you and whoever you were speaking to. They actually altered the atmosphere itself, made reality pause and recalibrate, because suddenly, someone was telling the truth, without apology or softening, or the usual social lubrication we coat our honesty with to make it go down easier. What's extraordinary about that moment isn't that you raised your voice or made a scene or performed some dramatic confrontation, because you didn't do any of those things. You simply stated a fact with the calm certainty of someone who has lived through enough to recognize patterns, to see through facades, to understand exactly what's happening, even when everyone around you is pretending otherwise. And that quiet delivery, that surgical precision, made your words infinitely more powerful than any amount of shouting ever could have been. See, chaos and anger and loud confrontation are easy to dismiss. People know how to defend against those things. They can call you emotional or unhinged or too sensitive. They can wait for you to exhaust yourself and then return to business as usual. But what you did was something entirely different. You spoke truth so clear and undeniable that it required no emotional charge to land. It simply existed as an observation of reality. And observations like that are impossible to argue with, because they're not opinions or perspectives or interpretations. They're just what is. And when someone states what is with that kind of clarity, even those who profit from confusion and deception have to stop and acknowledge that something significant just happened. You weren't trying to convince anyone of anything. You weren't seeking validation or approval. You weren't performing for an audience or trying to win an argument. You were simply naming something that needed to be named, pulling back the curtain on a truth that everyone could see, but no one was willing to say out loud. And in that moment, you became the voice for every person who's ever been gaslit into doubting their own perception. Every soul who's been told they're too sensitive when they react to genuine mistreatment. Every individual who's been made to feel crazy for recognizing manipulation disguised as care or cruelty, dressed up as honesty. All of that collective experience, all of that accumulated pain and clarity and exhaustion with the games people play. You channeled it into words that cut through pretense like light through darkness. And the people who heard you, really heard you, felt something shift inside themselves too, because you gave them permission to trust their own eyes again, to believe in their own assessment of reality, to stop second-guessing themselves when they can clearly see what's happening right in front of them. That's the power of speaking unvarnished truth. It doesn't just liberate you. It creates space for others to breathe honestly too. And that's what made your words so devastating to those who depend on everyone staying silent and compliant and too polite to call out what's really going on. Because you demonstrated that it's possible to simply state what you see, without wrapping it in diplomacy or concern for how it will be received. And once someone does that, once someone shows that the emperor genuinely has no clothes, and that it's perfectly acceptable to say so, the whole fragile structure of polite fiction becomes harder to maintain. You didn't curse them, or threaten them, or even attack them directly. You just held up a mirror and forced them to see what they actually are, what they actually do, how they actually move through the world. And that kind of reflection is more uncomfortable than any insult could ever be, because it's irrefutable. It's just the truth presented plainly. And truth like that has a quality that makes even chaos itself pause and take notice. Because while disorder and madness can feed on emotion and confusion and passionate outbursts, they don't quite know what to do with calm, clear-eyed honesty that requires no justification and seeks no permission. It simply is. And in being so completely and unapologetically itself, it becomes untouchable, unshakable, a force that changes the conversation permanently, because you can't unhear truth once it's been spoken. You can only pretend you didn't hear it. And even that pretense becomes more difficult with every passing moment, because your words are still hanging in the air, still resonating in everyone's chest, still reminding them that someone finally said what needed to be said. And now that it's been said, everything is different. Everything has shifted, and there's no going back to the comfortable lies that used to keep everyone pacified. Because you broke the simulation, shattered the illusion, and spoke the kind of truth that makes uncomfortable reality impossible to ignore. You held up reality like a mirror and said, "This is what's actually happening." And they couldn't deny it, because you weren't emotional. You were factual. You were speaking from a place so grounded in observable truth that even chaos itself had to acknowledge something fundamental had shifted in the room. The moment you spoke, you reminded everyone present, including those who thrive on disorder and unpredictability, that truth has its own architecture, its own unshakable foundation that doesn't need volume or performance to stand firm. It simply exists as an immovable fact that no amount of deflection or distraction can erase. What you said wasn't opinion or perspective or interpretation. It was diagnosis, a clinical observation delivered with the precision of someone who has studied the situation so thoroughly that they can name exactly what's wrong, without hesitation or doubt. And that act of naming, of pulling something out of the shadows and holding it up to the light, that strips it of its power over you, permanently. Now they're scrambling, replaying that moment in their minds like a glitch in their programming, asking themselves how you knew, how you saw through everything. Because up until that point, they thought you were manageable, predictable, safe. They thought your silence meant weakness, and your patience meant ignorance, and your calm meant you didn't notice. But you noticed everything. You filed it away, documented every lie and inconsistency and moment their mask slipped. And you waited, not for revenge or validation, but for the perfect moment to speak one sentence that would unravel their entire narrative without you even raising your voice. Here's what they don't want you to understand. You're not chaos. You're something more dangerous than chaos. You're order that's been through fire. You're the person who understands the game so well you don't need to play it anymore. You're the one who's seen behind the curtain and walked through the carnival of lies and survived the funhouse of manipulation and came out the other side with your sanity intact and your vision clear. And that clarity is more threatening than any amount of disorder. Because you're not here to destroy. You're here to expose. That moment was a declaration of independence from their reality. from the world where other people controlled the narrative and decided what was true and what was acceptable and what you were allowed to say and feel. You played by their rules for years, spoke their language, apologized for things you didn't do wrong, shrunk yourself to fit into their comfortable little boxes, until something broke inside you. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating way. The leash snapped, and the programming glitched, and the filter disintegrated. And suddenly you realized you don't need their permission to state reality. You don't need their approval to speak truth. You don't need their validation to exist in your full, unedited, unfiltered form. What you proved in that moment is that real freedom isn't chaos, it's clarity. Real power isn't destruction, it's precision. Real strength isn't madness, it's the ability to stay sane in an insane world and still speak truth without flinching. You didn't need to burn anything down, you just needed to turn on the lights. And in that light, everyone who was hiding in the shadows suddenly got exposed. Because when you said what you said, you were really saying, I see you. I see all of you. I see the game and the manipulation and the performance and the fear behind the confidence and the emptiness behind the noise. And I'm no longer participating in the delusion. That's what made chaos itself pause. Because disorder depends on people buying into the narrative that nothing means anything, that truth is relative, that everyone's just pretending. But you proved that's a lie. You proved that truth exists and clarity exists, and some people can walk through the carnival and not get lost in the mirrors. And that makes you more dangerous to those who profit from confusion than any conventional opposition. Because you're not opposing them, you're transcending them. The person who said what you said isn't the same person who used to stay quiet to keep the peace. That version is gone, burned away in the fires of betrayal and disappointment and manipulation. And what's left is someone who's been through hell and didn't become bitter or cruel or like them. You became honest, dangerously, unflinchingly, uncompromisingly honest. And honest people are terrifying, because you can't manipulate someone who refuses to pretend. You can't control someone who's no longer afraid of consequences. You can't silence someone who's already lost everything and discovered they're still standing. Absolute clarity is more unpredictable than chaos. Because with chaos, you can still game the system and manipulate variables and play probabilities. But when someone speaks with total clarity, when they cut through all the noise and all the performance and all the lies and just state what is, there's no counter move, there's no defense, there's no way to spin it or reframe it or redirect it. It just is. And everyone in the room knows it's true, even if they'll never admit it out loud. You didn't give them chaos, you gave them truth. And truth is the only thing chaos can't dance around. Truth is the only force that makes liars and manipulators and performers genuinely uncomfortable, because it requires no emotional charge to land. It simply exists as an observation of reality that cannot be argued with. Right now, they're trying to figure out how to respond. Do they deny it and look defensive? Do they attack you and prove you were right? Do they ignore it when everyone heard it? Do they laugh it off when the laugh sounds hollow because you struck bone? You put them in a position where every possible response confirms what you said. That's checkmate. That's not a move in the game. That's ending the game entirely. You're probably wondering if you went too far, second-guessing yourself, running through the moment over and over, asking if you should have stayed quiet, or been more diplomatic, or softened the blow. But let me answer that for you. No. You said exactly what needed to be said, in exactly the way it needed to be said. And the fact that it made people uncomfortable, The fact that it shifted the atmosphere and changed the dynamic and exposed the truth. That's not evidence you went too far. That's evidence you finally went far enough. They've trained you your whole life to measure your truth against other people's comfort. They've conditioned you to believe that if your honesty makes someone uncomfortable, you've done something wrong. But that's the trap. That's how they keep you small. Because if you're always worried about their feelings, and always concerned about their reaction, and always calculating how much truth they can handle, you'll never speak the full truth. You'll always edit yourself, and water yourself down, and translate yourself into something more palatable. And they love that. They love when you self-censor and shrink, and carry the weight of their comfort on your shoulders, while they walk around free. But you didn't do that this time. You dropped the weight. You stopped managing their emotions and protecting them from reality, and being the shock absorber for their fragile egos. And you just said it. Raw, unfiltered, undiluted truth. And the moment you did, you became free. Not free from consequences, because there are always consequences when you speak truth in a world built on lies. But free from the prison of needing their approval. Free from the chains of performing for their validation. Free from the exhausting labor of making reality digestible for people who are committed to choking on fantasy. What you did wasn't performance. It was revelation. You weren't playing a character. You were being yourself at full volume, and full clarity, and full power. And that authenticity, that raw, unmediated realness, it cuts through every performance. Because you weren't trying to shock or offend or hurt. You were trying to be honest. And honest is the only thing that makes liars and manipulators and performers genuinely uncomfortable. They're going to try to make you pay for what you said. Not immediately and not directly. But they'll weaponize your honesty and call it cruel. They'll frame your clarity as coldness. They'll spin your truth-telling as an attack. They'll make you the villain in a story where you were just stating facts. And here's the part they're not ready for. You don't care. Not because you're heartless, but because you finally understand that their opinion of you is not your responsibility. Their comfort with reality is not your burden. Their ability to handle truth is not your problem. The reason people fear truth-tellers isn't because truth hurts. It's because truth exposes. It rips away the comfortable lies and the pretty narratives and the carefully constructed identities. When you speak truth, you don't just challenge what people believe. You challenge who they believe they are. You force them to look at the gap between their self-image and their actual behavior. You make them confront the difference between what they claim and what they do. And most people can't handle that level of honesty. They'll do anything to avoid looking in that mirror. They'll attack you and dismiss you and gaslight you. Anything to avoid admitting you're right. You've been watching and learning and documenting. You've seen how they operate, how they deflect and project, and twist reality to maintain their delusions. You've watched them lie to themselves so convincingly they actually believe it. You've witnessed the mental gymnastics and the cognitive dissonance and the emotional manipulation disguised as care. And you stayed quiet, not because you didn't see it, but because you were waiting for the right moment, waiting for the perfect opening, waiting until you could say something so undeniable and so precise and so surgical that there would be no room for misinterpretation. And when that moment came, you took it. You spoke truth without needing it to be heard. Most people speak truth to convince or persuade or change minds. But you spoke truth because it needed to be said, whether anyone listened or not. That's the difference between speaking for validation and speaking from integrity. You weren't performing truth, you were embodying it. And that level of authenticity, that depth of self-certainty. It doesn't just command respect, it commands silence. Because when someone speaks from that place, from that core of unshakable knowing, there's nothing left to say. The conversation is over. The verdict is in. Reality has been acknowledged. And here's the truth that seals all of this. That moment wasn't just about them, and it wasn't just about the sentence you finally said out loud. It was about the person you became while saying it. You crossed an invisible line between surviving quietly and standing clearly. You didn't destroy anything. You clarified it. You didn't burn bridges. You exposed which ones were already rotten. You didn't start chaos. You ended illusion. From this point forward, you're no longer negotiating with reality, softening truth to fit fragile narratives, or shrinking yourself to preserve comfort that was never protecting you in the first place. You are moving differently now. Not louder, not angrier, not harder, but cleaner, truer, and impossible to confuse with who you used to be. The old version of you tried to keep the peace. This version keeps the truth. And once someone becomes that, once they stop editing themselves for environments that thrive on distortion, there is no undo button. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unsay what you've said. And you can't go back to pretending not to know what you now understand in your bones. That moment wasn't a rupture. It was a graduation. A release from the exhausting job of carrying other people's delusions while abandoning your own clarity. You didn't just speak, you arrived. And everything after this moves differently because you do. God, creator of truth, clarity, and unshakable strength, I ask that you cover every person who has finally found their voice with peace that surpasses understanding and courage that does not waver under pressure. Let their words continue to come from wisdom, not bitterness, from clarity, not fear, from strength, not anger. Heal the years they spent silencing themselves to survive environments that never deserved their gentleness. Restore the confidence that was chipped away by manipulation, dismissal, and gaslighting. Anchor them so deeply in truth that no distortion can confuse them, no projection can shake them, and no consequence can pull them back into pretending. Surround them with discernment so they know when to speak and when to walk away, when to engage and when to let silence do the work. Let their clarity become protection, their honesty become freedom, and their presence become light for others still trapped in doubt. Strengthen their spine, soften their heart, sharpen their perception, and keep their spirit unbreakable. Amen. If this message resonated with you, if you felt seen, understood, or strengthened by these words, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it right now. And if you want to support the creation of more content that empowers clarity, truth, and self-liberation, consider donating. Your support helps keep this work alive and reaching those who need it most.